O ran ein taith ni, roedden ni'n ffodus i gael cyfle i fod yn un o'r ysgolion arloesol, a roedd hyn yn sicr wedi gosod y tôn ac wedi bod yn sbardun i ni o'r cychwyn cyntaf. Ynghyd â hyn, roedd hwn yn gyfle i ni rannu arferion ar draws y cwricwlwm ni yma yn Gartholwg, tra hefyd yn rhoi'r hyder i ni arbrofi a hynny o fewn a thu hwnt ein maes arbenigol ni. Rydym wedi buddsoddi amser i staff i ddod at ei gilydd, ond mae hyn wedi bod yn nodwedd gref o fewn yr ysgol, a mae'r staff yn sicr wedi croesawu'r cyfle yn fawr i ryngweithio a chydweithio ar yr agwedd sy'n greiddiol i'r gwaith dydd i ddydd, sef cynnwys ei gwersi ni. Yn amlwg, mae reoli unrhyw newid yn her, ond drwy weithio yn yr ysbryd cywir, mae'r cyfadrannau meysydd dysgu a phrofiad wedi gweld hwn yn gyfle i gydweithio a rhyngweithio gyda'i gilydd, mwyn sicrhau bod ni'n creu cwricwlwm sy'n addas i'n dysgwyr ni. Yn sicr fel ysgol 39 newydd, mae hwn wedi tanio'r drafodaeth o'r hyn sy'n bwysig i ni ac wedi bod yn fodd i lunio gweledigaeth gytun, tra hefyd yn rhoi'r autonomi i'r meysydd gwahanol dorri pwysau hunain. Mae'r pwysleision barhaus mai taith yw hon ac nid darn o waith i gyflawni'n berffedd erbyn mis Medi hefyd wedi bod yn fodd i leddfu gofidiau a chaniatáu'r staff weld hon fel proses adeiladol sy'n mynd i esblygu a datblygu dros y flynyddoedd nesaf. Rydym wedi paratoi drwy dderbyn cymorth arbenigwyr nôl yn haf 2021 a mae'r penaethiad cysylltiol sy'n arwain am meysydd dysgu a phrofiad yn sicr wedi elwa o'r sesiynau diweddaru gan ein consortiwm ni. Y cam olaf nawr yw addasu'r hyfforddiant i sicrhau cyfleoedd dysgu proffesiynol unigol a phenodol i'r staff wrth i ni edrych ymlaen at fis Medi. Mae bod yn ysgol 39 yn sicr wedi bod o fydd i ni, gan ei bod wedi elwa yn sicr o brofiad y staff yr ysgol isaf a'r ysgol ganol sydd mor brofiadol yn gweithio mewn modd trawscwricwlaidd. Roedd hyn yn fantes wrth i ni gydweithio fewn ein clwstwr yn ogystal a byddwn ni'n annog unrhyw ysgol uwchradd i gydweithio'n agos gyda'i clysterau wrth datblygu y cwricwlwm a manteisio'n llawn ar y môr o brofiad ac arbenigedd sydd ar gael o fewn y system. Un o'r prif heriau erbyn hyn yw'r linell amser yn enwedig o gofio bod tasgau penodol i gyflawni erbyn y Pasg. Gyda staff yn parhau brofi'n bositif gyda Covid-19, rydym yn gorfod blaenoriaethu cynnal addysg gyflawn ac uniongyrchol i'n disgyblion ac felly mae'r elfennau strategol yn gorfod cael ei neilltuo dro i dro. I ni'n goresgu'n hyn drwy fod yn synhwyrol yn y disgwyliadau a pham fo cyfyngiadau dwys o fewn un maes dysgu a phrofiad gan gofio nad yw hyn yn gyson o fewn yn ysgolion ni, sôn ar draws ysgolion ni. Mae angen i ni fod yn ystyrlon a pham fod resymau dilys iawn dros hyn, mae oedi yn anochel. Bydd modd cysoni'r cyfan yn hymor ar haf wrth i ni obeithio fwynhau cyfnod mwy sefydlog yn y system addysg. Fel rwy wedi crybwyll eisoes, yr hyn sy'n allweddol i ni yw pwysleisio mae taith yw hon. Taith lle welwn ni ein cwricwlwm yn esblygu a hynny drwy dreialu, cymryd ambell risg, dwyn ambell syniad ysgolion eraill a addasu chydig mwy ac yn y blaen. Mae cynnydd a boddhad ein disgyblion yn greiddiol i bob dim gyda'r cyfle i ni fanteisio ar dirwra'r cyfan i'n cyd-destun ni yma. Yn fwy na dim, mae hon yn daith i'w fwynhau a dyna yw a fydd profiad ni yma yn ysgol Gartholwg.
Prynhawn da, gyfeillion, and a very warm welcome to you all to this event today. We have had far too few opportunities to come together over the past years. And although we are very largely online again today, probably a good thing considering what Storm Eunice is proposing to do to us all, but we are at least here in numbers. Every primary, secondary, special and all through school in Wales has been asked to be here today. Croeso mawr I chi gyd.
Warm welcome to you all.
My name is Brychan. I'm Assistant Dean at the Athrofa, which is the Centre for Education at the University of Wales, Trinity St David. And it is our great pleasure to co-host this event with the Welsh Government this afternoon. So I just wanted to take you through two things to remember before I introduce the people you've really come to hear this afternoon. The first is that simultaneous translation is, of course, available. And please do, therefore, select, if you need it, the English toggle as your language of choice on the interpretation button. Once you have done that, I will go on to the second point, which I will make in Welsh.
And the second point is to encourage you to ask questions. You can ask questions live this afternoon, even though a number of you I know have sent questions in advance as well through DISC. So please send your questions in the chat. They might not appear on screen immediately, but we won't forget them, I can assure you of that. So broadly this afternoon, the order of the meeting is that the Minister for Education and Welsh Language, Jeremy Miles, will speak first. Then we will have comments from the Estyn Chief Inspector, Owen Evans. Then we'll go on to your questions, the most important contributors this afternoon.
Without any further delay, therefore, I would like to ask the Minister, Jeremy Miles, up to the lectern to speak. Weinidog. Croeso.
Minister, welcome.
Well, prynawn da.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining this session this afternoon. I know that finding time to be at an event like this, however important, is not always easy, and perhaps especially considering the arrangements you'll be putting in place to respond to the environmental challenges at the moment. So thank you for joining us. And let me start this afternoon, if I may, by acknowledging the leadership you've provided in responding to the pandemic over the last 2 years. Your contribution has been and still is absolutely critical in keeping our learners learning and in supporting their well-being. And of course, in supporting the well-being of your entire school community, teachers, assistants, and the wider workforce. You've had to navigate under pressure, a new range of competing demands and novel challenges, and the situation obviously still remains challenging between the ongoing measures to protect learners and staff, as well as the cumulative impact of the last 2 years. You are leaders in a system which is very much still under stress, even though we all recognise that we want to try and restore something approaching greater normality as soon as we can. Your dedication in those circumstances is inspiring, and on behalf of the children and people of Wales, I want to thank you for that.
I'm conscious that one of the consequences of coming into my role during the pandemic is that there hasn't actually been a particularly natural opportunity for me to share my thoughts with you more broadly on our reform programme. There have been important decision points when I've tried to set the choices I've made in context, but today, whilst very much focused on the practical steps ahead and how we can help you, I want to share some of those broader thoughts with you briefly. So, like many of you, I imagine, education changed my life. I loved school. I had inspiring teachers. I could name them few now. They encouraged me to read widely in Welsh and in English, to expand my horizons. They challenged me. They helped me understand how my community, my country, its history, its culture, its language shaped my world, and what part I had to play in it. They encouraged my aspirations. They encouraged my confidence to overcome obstacles that might lie ahead. I came from a pretty ordinary working class background, and I had in many ways the kind of extraordinary education we all want for our young people. And that really is what motivated me and in fact enabled me to be a member of the Senedd today. And I know that our new curriculum for Wales can deliver that for the next generation. I want to see an education system which offers high standards and aspirations for all. And we are acutely conscious that the economic circumstances of individual learners plays too large a role in their experience of school, in their aims and in their achievements. And we are certainly conscious of the differential impact of the last 2 years on our learners. We also know that whilst some of the answers lie in our hands in schools, this is rooted in realities outside the life of the school. Now, as a government, we've sought to support our most disadvantaged learners through free school meals, PDG access, extending digital opportunities in schools, alongside having a clear focus on reaching those pupils who might need more support when we design initiatives such as Seren, TIFE, Young Person's Guarantee. So as a government, we are demonstrating a firm commitment to raising aspirations and supporting the ambitions of all our learners. But we need to do more than mitigation. And over the coming months, I'll bring forward a series of further initiatives for improving equity in education, for responding to the effects of socioeconomic disadvantage in our schools, and a relentless focus on raising aspirations and attainment for all our learners and making it a clearer part of our national mission. We know that one of the key factors that can make a difference to the aspirations of the children who face the greatest barriers is good quality teaching. Teachers who listen to them and to their experiences and work with them to raise their ambitions and aspirations. And this takes us back to the purpose of this event, the potential of the new curriculum to be transformative for all our young people, because at its heart is a focus on what we want for our learners, what they want for themselves, and what we as a system can do to remove the barriers in their way. And the new ways of working with our learners in the new curriculum as well, more tailored to their needs, cultivating the imagination, the curiosity, the ability to connect and to question. This provides us with a very important tool to deliver those high standards and aspirations for all. So I want to thank you for your ongoing commitment to curriculum reform. You, the leaders and teachers of this country, understand what our learners need to reach their potential. And as we ready ourselves for this generational change, and as we look at the months ahead, I'm sure that you will all feel at different points on the journey. I know that there are some of you who are raring to get going now, while others may be looking at September and thinking, I don't really feel as prepared as I'd like to be. I'm struggling for time and I've got a lot on my plate. And probably every point in between. And after the 2 years that we've all just had, I think that's completely natural. But my message to you all today is this: it's not too late, and most importantly, you are not alone in this. I don't underestimate the challenge, but nor do I underestimate your ability to make it work. And what I want to talk about this afternoon is how we do it. Firstly, I want us to keep returning to the key principles that make this curriculum a once-in-a-generation opportunity. At the heart of that are, of course, the 4 purposes of the curriculum. And those 4 purposes are central to empowering you as professionals and giving you the flexibility to do the best by your learners. And let's keep reminding ourselves why these purposes, why the curriculum is so important. Firstly, they support aspiration and ambition. You all know how important raising those aspirations is, and it's absolutely central to my vision in tackling the impact of poverty on attainment and setting high standards for all. The curriculum has got to be relevant and accessible to every single one of our learners, to engage and support them, to have high aspirations for their education and their future careers. And the new curriculum is a great opportunity to achieve this. Secondly, it's about challenge and support. We want to raise the bar for learners with a curriculum that's as rigorous as it is challenging, by focusing on what really matters in learning, why it matters, and what it means to make progress. We'll raise standards in Wales. This is fundamental. We must challenge every learner in their areas of strength and support them in their areas for development. Thirdly, it's about self-confidence and well-being. Only when learners and staff are happy, confident, motivated in their teaching and learning can they achieve their best. Our young people have faced massive challenges, and I don't need to tell you that. And the legacy of this will be with us for some time. They already face more profound demands on their well-being from society at large than I did when I was at school, and providing an environment in which that can be addressed is a fundamental aspect of the new curriculum. Fourthly, it's about skills to make the most of life. We know that lifelong learning is integral for a modern and successful economy, and learners need to be prepared now for that continuous learning and change. We must give them the skills they need to flourish. Critical thinking, problem solving, and digital competence, just a few of the skills that our learners must learn. Fifth, it's about learning fit for every individual. We all know that there are young people who have, for whatever reason, disengaged from education, and we want a curriculum that meets every individual learner's needs, that feels relevant even to that pupil who is hard to engage, and so fosters that connection and awakens that interest, that recognises their progression and the knowledge, skills, and experiences that they need. This is, of course, central to the flexibility and agency offered by the curriculum for Wales, ensuring every school has ownership of their curriculum, but within a national approach that secures consistency across the country. Aspirational, challenging, future-facing, learner-focused. That's what we want for our learners, and that is what the Curriculum for Wales promises. But we can only realise that promise if we work together to make it happen. So I want to underline our commitment as a government to supporting you to make this a success. Whether you feel fully ready or whether you feel that you need a lot more support, we will be there to help you. That means first, giving you the right tools to do the job. Second, making sure the system is working with you. And third, promoting the collaborative spirit that we need to see each other through. So, giving you the tools of the job. Well, I will do everything in my power to ensure you have the support that you need to make this happen. I've been talking to heads regularly since I took up my post, and I know that one of the key areas that's causing anxiety is progression and assessment. This is a big cultural shift from the way things have been done before. We know that assessment must build on progression, being clear on what needs to be learnt, why and how learners progress determines how that should be assessed. But the key thing is that this is not about starting from scratch. Yes, we are taking away aspects of the current arrangements that we know don't help learners progress, such as the end of stage assessments, but we are looking to build on effective classroom practice that already exists, particularly approaches to supporting well-being and progression that we've seen over the last 2 years during the pandemic. So to support you, I will also be making new national support available for developing progression and assessment in the new curriculum. That includes Assessing for the Future, a series of professional development workshops being led by CAMAI to deepen understanding of assessment, develop assessment practice within the classroom, and to help practitioners turn the curriculum assessment guidance into reality for their learners. So in partnership with schools, we'll develop resources which will be available to all schools and settings, underpinned by academic research. This will be easily accessible via Hub to any teacher. It will include practical case studies and other resources, and will start to become available from the summer term and will build up over time. But that's only the start. I'm also launching today Camau i'r Dyfodol, Steps to the Future. Now, this is a longer-term project which will be carried out by the University of Wales, Trinity St David, and the University of Glasgow to support the understanding and application of learning progression in the new curriculum. Camau i'r Dyfodol will bring together the expertise and the experience of practitioners and education partners to co-develop a shared understanding of progression for all learners that is meaningful, manageable, and sustainable. It'll be delivered through the national network, and all schools will have the opportunity to build on their current experience of learning progression and to contribute to a shared national understanding of what's important. What this means in practice is that schools, practitioners, and education partners, bringing to bear expertise from our universities as well as international evidence, will contribute to a growing body of evidence of supporting materials and activities that will be shared and available to feed directly back into the system and to support the development of progression-based curricula at the local level. This is a long-term, 3-year commitment to support the sustainability of curriculum implementation in all parts of Wales. But I'm sure many of you will be thinking, well, long-term commitment is great, but I'm starting to roll out the new curriculum in 6 months' time. So, in the meantime, from later this term, we'll publish case studies, outputs from the national network, and other supporting material to help schools to develop that shared understanding of progression and to work together as in their clusters to do that. Then, of course, there's professional learning. The OEC have said that Wales's commitment and focus on professional learning is, and I quote, exceptional in comparison to many other OECD jurisdictions. That is welcome, and we will absolutely continue to invest record levels of funding. But since becoming the Minister, I've been keen to speak to as many of you as possible to get a proper sense of what is actually happening on the ground. And I'm not yet convinced that our professional learning offer is as accessible and as useful as it could be. There is lots of it. But do you know what's there, what you should be looking for, where to look for it? And is it easy to find when you know where to look? I think the truth is there is too much variation, and despite the volume of material, too many gaps. So we will change that. We're developing a national entitlement that brings together a package of professional learning support that everyone will be entitled to and to benefit from. A truly national offer, and one that will be easier to navigate. And the word entitlement is important. Every single teaching professional will be entitled to high-quality professional learning. This entitlement has to work for you and to respond to your needs. So we'll work with you to make sure that it does. In practice, this means you will have a core package of professional learning together with a range of additional resources, all of which you can access via Hub and the School Improvement Services. By the end of this term, we'll have set out what this entitlement will look like and more detail on where to find things that matter. And the entitlement itself will be available to you for September at the latest, bringing all the resources and learning on professional learning which already exists together with those that will be progressively commissioned in the months and years ahead in one easy-to-find place. And curriculum resources are also important. We need bilingual educational resources and materials that are consistent with the spirit and ethos of the new curriculum. We'll be establishing a company in Wales specifically so that these can be developed. I'll be saying more about this in the coming weeks. But we won't wait for that company, however, to be set up. We'll push ahead in the meantime with commissioning and developing materials and resources that will support you. I also want you to have the opportunity to access the best from across the country. This is the curriculum for Wales, after all. So I am committing that materials developed in any school improvement service will be accessible to every school in Wales, whichever region or local authority area you are in, via Hub. That level of access will be available to you from September. But I want to say again, I know that there will be many teachers even now who may not feel prepared, who fear it's too late or who are unsure about the next steps, where to find support. who might not even be confident to kick off that conversation with a head or with a colleague. So at the end of the conference today, my officials will be sharing with you some materials which are tailored to help you to take the next steps, to identify what information, guidance and resources you need to find and where they are. So those are the tools for the job. We also need to make sure that the system works with you and not against you. So I'm committed to ensuring the whole system supports your schools to move towards reform. This means a single set of common priorities across the system, giving you clear expectations for areas to focus on and giving supporting partners a single framework and language to focus on supporting you. These common priorities will be reflected in school improvement guidance that will be published during the summer term, placing them clearly in context in our framework for evaluation, improvement and accountability. The guidance will also be clear how evaluation and improvement work is distinct from accountability. The future use of learner assessment information is a good example of this. Its primary purpose is to support individual learner progression, and it should also inform school self-evaluation and guide improvement in teaching and learning. But it must be kept clearly separate from accountability mechanisms if it's to meet its primary purpose. We must absolutely avoid conflating the two. And to help school leaders more practically, we'll also be launching the National Resource for Evaluation and Improvement following its piloting on Hub in the summer term. I also know that for secondary schools, a big question mark remains over qualifications. Some of you will be waiting for the new qualifications to inform your approach to assessment and the curriculum as a whole, particularly for those learners aged 14 to 16. As you know, Qualifications Wales is currently working on co-constructing a coherent and inclusive choice of bilingual qualifications for schools. This needs to align to the curriculum for Wales and to meet the needs of all learners. I've been clear that this work must be radical and it must be ambitious. It's not about repackaging or reshaping our existing qualifications. I want us to look afresh at the aims and the content and the assessment approaches for different qualifications. Now, in doing that, there's a lot we can draw on and learn from in responding to the pandemic, not least in terms of digital innovation and teachers' roles in assessment. And there's an opportunity now for you to work alongside Qualifications Wales to help shape the detail of these new qualifications. And I'd encourage you all to engage in that and to support the work as much as you can. But let me be clear, the qualifications will build on the curriculum for Wales. If you're preparing for the curriculum for Wales, you are preparing for the qualifications. And thirdly, doing this together. This is not just about what we do, how we support each other is just as critical. Co-construction has been at the heart of the development of the new curriculum from the start, and that is how we need to implement it too. We are all leaders in this change, and that means working together across different boundaries, between different organisations, and it means sharing problems and jointly developing solutions. It means every voice within the process contributing, not one voice giving direction and everyone else following. So the national network will be a permanent feature to give a voice to the profession to help drive future government policy and, crucially, to inform future professional learning. It's meant to give space and time for professionals to think and engage with other practitioners nationally. It's not meant to give all of the answers, but it is there to share expertise, to learn from each other. And it's meant to be a safe space to ask some of those difficult questions. The network is open to all schools and will be shortly open for bookings for the spring and summer terms, giving you the opportunity to input into those key questions around curriculum design, around qualifications, around progression, around assessment. If your school isn't clear about how to contribute to the preparation for the network sessions, and how to access the materials that come out of them, then you can access these via the curriculum page on Hub. And the materials you'll receive after the conference today will include a link to that. There's one other means of support that is vital to the development of every school's curriculum, and that is your colleagues. We are all doing this for the first time, and as such, no one has the final answer. So I urge you all to work with each other, understand what is working well, and crucially, why, and share what's not. There is real power in sharing learning, testing and improving your own work, contributing to a national discussion, as well as engaging and learning from others. Approaches may differ, but there are underpinning principles of effective practice which we can all learn from. And your networks, the national network, as well as, of course, Hub, are the key channels for sharing this information. And those networks are a critical form of support. Every school should be in a cluster with other schools at this point. But it is crucial that these are functioning in a way which provides mutual support and challenge as we move forward through the curriculum. And you've got a role in shaping the work of the cluster that you're part of. This should be supported as well by the school improvement services. But if you have concerns about how your school-to-school arrangements are working, it's really important that you discuss those with your school improvement service. And then finally, to conclude, colleagues, September isn't the end, it's the beginning of our next leg on the journey. We've embarked on a journey of continuing reform. It won't always be an easy path. There'll be some bumps in the road, but it will be worth it. And please remember that you're not alone on this journey. There is support for you. We all want each other to succeed on this endeavour for the sake of our learners. And we have the privilege and the opportunity together to reshape the education our children and young people receive. And we must grab that with both hands. Diolch yn fawr.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. A great deal there for us to consider, and we'll have the opportunity to discuss with questions, so please do continue to send them in. And we'll come to the questions, as I said, but before that, we do have the opportunity now to listen to the Chief Inspector, Owen Evans, who will also be joining us to answer some questions later. So welcome, Owen.
Diolch yn fawr, Anna.
Thank you, Anna.
First of all, can I thank you for the opportunity to speak at this event, and thanks, Minister, for your speech and your passion for the new curriculum. I've been in post for the rather paltry total of 48 days, so as I keep telling my colleagues, please don't expect any pearls of wisdom.
First of all, I'd like to pay tribute to my predecessor, Meilir Rowlands, and also my colleague, Claire Morgan, who held the fort over the last few months. It's a privilege to walk into a strong, talented organisation that operates professionally across the country. I also know that the call from Estyn does cause the same anxieties for some of you as a dental appointment, as I found out over Christmas when a head teacher friend of mine, and I won't name him, congratulated me, but added, "Don't feel you need to call." Don't feel you need to call.
What I'd like to talk to you about this afternoon is perhaps to talk about my journey here, a little about our approach this year to return to inspections, but with a sympathetic ear. I'd like to talk about the curriculum, its importance, and how Estyn is adapting, as we all must, and finally about some changes in approach from us at Estyn. My journey here has been indirect, to say the least. From my hometown in Aberystwyth through North and South Wales, England and Scotland, my career hasn't been straightforward. I don't try to hide the fact that I'm not from an inspection background, but someone who's worked across the private, third and public sectors, most recently leading S4C through probably its greatest changes in living memory. I was, of course, involved in education for several years in Welsh Government and more recently chaired Cardiff's Education Development Board. I have a track record of leading change, and yes, over time, I will be looking at every aspect of our work and how we can improve on our impact. I'll need the support of my colleagues, though, and equally, I will need your support as we discuss new ideas and new ways of working, retaining the best elements of our work, but also trialling new ways of working. In that respect, I'm looking forward to meeting you over the coming months and years as I learn and begin to float ideas about how we adapt to serve the future of education here in Wales. Before I start, though, I'd like to thank all of you and your staff for the fantastic work that you've done during the past couple of years to support learners' well-being and progress. The leadership shown at just keeping the show on the road has been considerable, and the innovation, particularly around digital communications and blended learning, have been a revelation. Your response continues to be remarkable, and I think in the finest traditions of the profession. It's been a time for significant changes for Estyn too. We've paused our normal activities in favour of supporting the sectors and curriculum development. That was, I think, the right decision, and one that has allowed us to build a different relationship with many of you. Indeed, I think over the past couple of years, the experience of spending more time on lighter touch, support-orientated engagement has stood us in good stead and has improved our relations with practitioners, and this is something I'd like to build on for the future. We've seen leadership abilities grow as we've coped with unforeseen challenges and the need to reevaluate normal practices. The pandemic has forced you to think differently about everything that you do, question long-established ways of working, and take decisive action. The pandemic has also led to rapid development of both pure and blended online learning, something that I think we all need to keep hold of as we return to what will be a new normal. One of my first decisions at Estyn, day 2 as I remember, was to agree to the postponement of our pilot inspections until after half-term. I do get the fact there are many competing demands for your attention, not least changes to the curriculum, coping with the changes in the qualifications regime, improving the quality of teaching, but yes, frequently just trying to keep the show on the road as the pandemic went through its various stages and you found yourself short of teachers on a Sunday evening. I should probably mention storms at this point. We faced our own challenges. We refocused our work on a lighter touch, but retained our focus on supporting schools in more depth when required. I think it's notable that during the pandemic, work was underway to ensure that several schools have come out of follow-up categories, and I'd like to congratulate the leaders and staff from these schools. We also adapted to the fact that we haven't had core data sets, and there were still naturally gaps in people's books, but we were still able to carry out, I think, our work and form robust evaluations. We focused on the school's processes and provision and any evidence of impact that we could see. All schools and PRUs in category have had a pastoral HMI who's been in communication with the school throughout the pandemic. This has helped us to understand better the context and challenges of each school and adapt our work accordingly. Our inspection engagement work during 2021-2022 has focused on supporting renewal and reform, and we will continue to do so. But I strongly believe that we do need to get back to the business of assurance and inspection. Whilst we will be sympathetic, we must also now plan to establish what will become a new normal, ready for unexpected events, but experienced in how to deal with them. To demonstrate this approach in our new framework, which will soon be piloted with a small number of providers in the spring term, we will focus on ensuring that how we inspect supports a positive mindset. We will discuss at the start of every inspection how you feel the pandemic has affected you. We will be listening. The framework will have a subtle new emphasis, the main changes being a stronger focus on agile and responsive leadership, the culture for safeguarding, not just the policies and arrangements, and a strengthened link between professional learning and quality of teaching. To support this approach to inspection, we will be fair and impartial, but we will also be supportive. We will work to guide providers to implement improvements that benefit learners. The Minister talked about a safe space earlier on. I think it's important that we will encourage innovation and recognise good intentions. We will support educational reform. We will also, and I think critically, praise innovation, even if you fail. Estyn has its part in making Wales a safe space to try new ways and to explore new approaches. We're not here to stifle your innovation. We will be reflective and open-minded. We will listen to a wide range of stakeholders and reflect on their responses. And we will be transparent, we will be well-informed, and we will communicate clearly, directly, and succinctly. More on that later. We will use effective and efficient inspection methodologies, but critically, we will use them to respond to the provider's unique situation. We will plan inspection activity and report on strengths and weaknesses in ways that reflect the particular circumstances of each of your schools. We hope that this will promote trust and mutual respect. And we hope that our work with schools and PRUs causing concern during the last few terms has provided reassurance about our approach and understanding of the ongoing challenges facing your schools. By the way, can I take this opportunity to thank those of you who have been in touch to nominate your school as a pilot inspection? and also those of you who have attended the first of our peer inspector update training events. Your role as peer inspectors continues to be a vital part of our inspection approach and an area where I'd like to see us increase our training provision. Our pilot inspections will be an important opportunity for us to refine our inspection methodology. We will learn together. We hope that the removal of summative gradings will make inspection less high stakes and will ensure a stronger focus on the evaluations and feedback presented by the team. The key for us is that our work is accessible, constructive, and that can facilitate positive change. For those looking for a bit more detail on next steps, our inspections in spring term will commence on the 28th of February. Stage 1 pilots will feature around 20 schools and PRUs. As I said, we'll be removing summative gradings, but we will provide a stronger narrative with a deeper focus on strengths and areas for improvement. There will be an increased focus on progress on the curriculum for Wales and adapting to the changes brought forward by the ALN Act. And finally, there will be an increased focus on safeguarding culture. We will continue the pilot inspections into the summer, but with one critical difference, in that we will be selecting those schools based on a range of criteria, including the time elapsed since the last core inspection, stage 2 pilots. It's worth emphasising that this term will see the first schools that we have selected rather than via volunteers. We anticipate the full rollout from September 23 to summer 2024, which will be the end of this 8-year cycle. It won't be a surprise that a major theme of our ongoing work will be our support for the curriculum for Wales. I was actually working in the Welsh Government back in the days when the new curriculum was a glint in the eye of the then Minister. I had the privilege to work with Graham Donaldson and others as he wrote the blueprint. I remember his field work talking to educators across Wales as he assembled his thoughts on what was wrong and how a new curriculum could re-energise education in Wales. A chance conversation with a colleague this week reminded me about his reflections on a workforce tied down with guidance on every facet of the curriculum, tied down by the inability to design their own ways of working and to use their own experience and skill, and possibly, most importantly, afraid to take chances. Roll on a few years and here I am. Estyn has a key role in ensuring that the new curriculum is a success. Estyn, like all of the education sector, has needed to adapt, and adapt we will. We understand that one-size-fits-all approach to the new curriculum won't work. We will recognise that every school will have applied the principles of the new curriculum depending on their own local situation and vision. We understand that some are ahead and some behind on their journey. We also recognise that the curriculum won't be a success unless schools learn from schools and also get the support they need to implement the changes required. It's a time when we all need to show a bit of leadership in ensuring this works. I've mentioned several times that we are sympathetic to what the sector as a whole has been through over the past couple of years. We really are. Now is the time, though, to be planning and working for the future. As I mentioned, we too have to adapt. As I've mentioned, we're adapting, and perhaps I can elaborate a little on how we will be approaching the evaluations of curriculum development. We will be evaluating the extent to which learning experiences stimulate and challenge the full range of pupils. We will approach innovation and flexibility approach in a positive way. We will consider how well the curriculum builds systematically and coherently. We will consider the extent the curriculum provides pupils with a suitable breadth and depth of experiences across a range of learning experiences and subjects. And we will consider how leaders have established a clear strategic rationale for the curriculum in terms of its benefits for pupils in preparing them to learn throughout their lives and play a full part in society. And something in line ac yn ddiwethaf.
Moving on, and finally, a few words about my own priorities as the new Chief Inspector. As someone who's just been a part of Cardiff's educational journey, I know the pressures inspections cause, but I've also seen if we ask the right questions, understand your situation, and offer a snapshot of the experience built within Estyn, the whole process should be challenging, but also constructive and ultimately positive, that enables any educational institution to improve. That is my ambition for all of our work. As part of delivering this, I think there are improvements we can make in targeting and packaging our work, especially around our thematic work. I truly believe we produce quality work. The reports on the peer-to-peer sexual harassment and also our review of language immersion are powerful examples of what we can achieve. And if you haven't read those, I would encourage you to have a look. But I fully understand the pressures you're on a day-to-day basis and the lack of time across education. So Estyn needs to provide accurate summaries of our findings to ensure that you have the important messages in front of you.
I asked a few colleagues last week how many of them had actually read our annual report cover to cover, and there was quite a bit of shuffling. It won't surprise you, hopefully, that there was work underway already to make this year's more accessible and hopefully useful. I hope also that you'll start to see a shift towards providing more accessible reviews and reports with concise summaries and tailored versions for our various stakeholders, you, the profession, but also for learners and indeed parents and governors and even policymakers. Impact is my main goal, and through such measures, I hope that Estyn can build on its work to provide the assurance and support you require as we all seek to improve day to day for the benefit of learners across Wales. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr, Owen.
Thank you. Owen.
Over to you now, essentially. We're hoping that you will have submitted a number of questions that I can put to our esteemed panel here, including what I will now think of as the Chief Dentist. But we have, fortunately, also submitted some questions already via disc. Diolch yn fawr am rheini.
Thank you for those.
Questions, Owen, you've already answered, which was a very broad one. What are Estyn's plans over the coming months? I think we need to refer people back to your speech for that. But I wanted to ask a question. This one has come in through disc, and you touched upon it in your speech, Minister. But I think this question does convey the genuine concerns that are in the system currently about the introduction of the curriculum in 2022 in September in the context of COVID. And this questioner is asking, is that realistic in the context of the period that we have had and people's preparedness for that introduction?
Well, I mean, it's a good question, and I'm asked it, quite often when I go to meet heads and when I'm in schools. So clearly the last 2 years has posed incredible challenges and incredible pressures on heads and staff more broadly, as well as learners themselves. But I think one of the reflections that we need to take from that is that the adaptability and the capacity of the profession to respond creatively, flexibly, and with real gusto, I think, in those incredibly challenging circumstances. As I said in my speech, I don't underestimate what lies ahead, but I also do not underestimate our teaching professionals to be able to respond to that. Now, there's a practical set of challenges that come with that, as you say, preparation, time to prepare, and those sorts of key questions. Last year, we did a lot of work working with schools to try and identify the level of preparedness. And it was clear at that point that primary schools generally felt further along the journey than secondary schools. So as you know, I provided a bit of extra flexibility for secondary schools to make their decision whether they start this year or next year, and they'll need to have decided that by early April. And I've also tried to lift some of the pressures in the context of COVID specifically, whether that's end-of-year assessments, whether it's categorisation. Estyn obviously have suspended their inspection programme. There have been a range of ways in which I hope that has been able to create a little bit more space in schools. And on top of that, the funding which we are putting into the system, both to respond to COVID, but also on a continuing basis to implement the curriculum, another £35 million going into the system this next financial year, of which about 20 odd will be going directly to schools. I hope that's providing also some extra capacity to address these multiple challenges. At the end of last year, we tried to put forward a set of guidelines in the journey to curriculum reform, which try to reconcile, if you like, for schools, some of these competing pressures. Easy for me to say that as minister, isn't it? I'm not ahead struggling with these challenges in school. But just to say, we want to see these things working in the same direction rather than pulling in opposite directions, if you like. And I outlined a little bit in my speech for those schools who feel this most acutely, the pressures. There's a lot of support available. We want to make it easier to find, but there's a lot more coming as well. So the support will be there for you.
Thank you. And I think for that question, I haven't got a name for that question, but it's worth reminding people perhaps that there will be resources shared after this event. And it'd be interesting to know what that questioner's response is to that material and to the context you've described there. You'll understand that a lot of the questions that have come in are about the curriculum. And there's one specific one that's come in. It's a concern that's been expressed reasonably regularly over the past few years, even before COVID. And it is that concern around the steps that are being taken to make sure that locally developed curricula don't entrench education inequalities. I know that this is a focus for you, Minister, and you mentioned it in your speech. But those inequalities around outcomes for children from less advantaged backgrounds in particular is the concern of this questioner.
Well, you heard me speak about that at the start of the speech, about how important I think this is. But I also said I think the new curriculum is a good opportunity for us to tackle this in our education system. So this isn't a situation where local schools on a local basis are able to do whatever they like. It isn't a free-for-all in that sense, is it? So there's a national framework, there is national guidance, clear national expectation about the content of the curriculum, what matters, what's mandatory, how progression works. Those are not negotiable, those are national expectations. But within that, there is scope for flexibility at a local level. That's obviously the entire premise of the curriculum. So schools will be working with other schools, and there'll be a moderating influence in that sense. Schools ought to be engaging with a national network, so if they're looking for guidance on how to deliver aspects of the curriculum better than perhaps they feel they might otherwise do, then there's an opportunity there. I talked about the national entitlement to professional learning. So there's a national infrastructure around the local decision making. But for me personally, at least, when I speak to heads who are in schools with high numbers of pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds, they can't wait to get started. Because what they know is if they can start that learning journey with something which fires the imagination, which feels relevant and resonant in the life of learners, you can take them on the journey of engagement to learning more, discovering more, realizing more. And that's the magic, I think, of the new curriculum. And I think that will particularly benefit learners who perhaps have been harder to engage.
Thank you. Do you think, Owen, that Estyn has a role in that context as well, making sure that the advantages of the curriculum are equally or even more felt by and seen by children who have fewer advantages otherwise?
I do. I think one of the critical areas for Estyn sometimes is that the curriculum, and I've spoken to other practitioners about this, can come to a crunching halt if they feel that either the qualifications don't reflect what they're teaching, or that Estyn are going to come in with their size 9s and inspect them on something that doesn't really reflect the work they're doing on the curriculum. Well, that's why we have to play our role. And I think that the important thing to remember is whatever we talk about the curriculum, it is based on excellent teaching. And it is based on excellent teachers in the classroom knowing their students and designing a curriculum that's going to stimulate them from whatever background and whatever ability they are. So I think, and I have some confidence in, we have a profession that can do this, but we can't get away from the fact that the curriculum is one thing, but excellent teaching underpinning it is something we've just got to keep an eye on. Thank you.
I see that we are having questions coming in now. I need to put my middle-aged glasses on to read it. This is a question on the programme that you obviously mentioned in your speech, Minister. Is it contradictory to say research between the University of Wales, Trinity St David and Glasgow will clarify assessment and at the same time argue no correct approach to curriculum, but multiple evolving approaches? Aren't assessment and curriculum design inseparable? Confidence to thrive in uncertainty, using freedom there to create, is using freedom there to create both key?
Well, yes, simply the answer to the question is yes, isn't it? I mean, the question is right. Curriculum and curriculum design and assessment is, is an integral package, if you like, isn't it? And the whole point of assessment in the new world is that it's, woven through the learner journey, really. I'm not sure I wasn't looking to point out a contradiction, because actually the process that we will see happening is one of co-design, really. So there will be absolutely opportunities for practitioners to help shape that, help shape each other's understanding. So it definitely isn't a question of setting out, in fact, we're moving away from that world, aren't we? We have a kind of a very distinctive set of requisite assessment outcomes. It's much more about best practice, learning what works, why it works, and sharing and shaping that as part of your teaching and learning experience. So I think it's a very creative period that lies ahead. I've been really focused, though, on making sure that teachers are able to access the product of that, really, because we all want to know what good looks like so we can inspire ourselves, and if we've got good examples to share, that's an important part of the new ecosystem. But it's really important that there's an output to this that teachers can engage with to inform their own practice. So I think that's what we'll see, and that'll start to become available after this half term.
Yes, and we hope so too. We're not, as part of this project, yes. That's another question that we'd like to continue the conversation with, I think. A question in Welsh now. There's no name on this one, I think. It is for both of you. How
can the success of the new curriculum be measured, specifically in terms of progression into post-compulsory education?
Here as well.
And in that case, how can schools work with colleges and sixth form units to build progression pathways? Are there lessons to be learned from the COVID era? Who wants to go first? Owen? Oh, thank you. Yes. When we were talking earlier, I was talking about when Estyn goes into the new inspection cycle, we will be looking at whether the curriculum has been designed to ensure that people can leave school with the confidence to succeed, as well as the skills. So I think that's intrinsic to what we expect to see from the curriculum. On the question of the COVID lessons learned, I think COVID has caused quite a bit of work around safeguarding and resilience with children, which has been great to see. And the type of skills that teachers across Wales have been working, not in class but on Zoom and so on, under collaboration with youth services, children's services in the local authorities and so on. It's actually brought many bodies together to build confidence and to ensure that those learners have confidence to succeed. So there are things we've learned from COVID, I think, in terms of how organisations work together. Perhaps the thing for the future is ensuring that keeps going, the best elements of that, but also ensuring that things don't go back to similar collaboration to what we had before. Thank you. And Minister, I was thinking specifically perhaps about the question about progression into post-compulsory education and how the curriculum will be measured to ensure that that process can work for young people who will be going to the next step of their career or education. Well, the starting point, I would say, is that not enough of this has been happening. The relationship hasn't been working in a way that prioritises the pathway of the individual and that progression. Whatever the next step for the individual, some go to the sixth form, some to college, some to work. The function of the education system is to support those options, to be available and to support the individual to choose the option that works best for them. So we've got a series of curriculum developments and amendments here. Amendments also taking place in the post-16 sector and the challenges to bring them together so they speak to each other. What I think will happen with a new commission that will manage the post-16 sector in future will be that there's going to be a closer relationship due to those arrangements between the post-16 colleges and schools. And that, I think, allows that pathway and progression to be more clearly established. There was a question asking what have we learned from COVID. I think we have learned, importantly, how fundamental progression is. We've had 2 years of pupils being awarded qualifications in unusual circumstances, and their idea of progression has been crucial, and it's important that the system has responded to that, and post-16 colleges have responded, I think, to the changing circumstances in a creative, supportive way, so that is a strong basis that we need to build on.
We'll
Thank
stay
you.
a minute, if we may, with the post-compulsory sector, because we have had a couple of questions here, associated questions from Nikki Neal in Gower College, and I think from Mark Jones, the principal of Gower College as well, asking specific questions around STEM. And considering, I think this is Mark's question, considering the regularly reported demand for STEM subjects and STEM graduates, should this be the time to bolster scientific skills and knowledge rather than reducing the content taught at GCSE? And the associated point was, of course, around the changes to GCSEs in that context.
I'm not sure, with respect to Mark, that I'd accept the premise of the question that that the plan is to reduce the content. So the proposal from Qualifications Wales is to create a sort of double a GCSE worth 2 effectively, which would include chemistry, biology and physics, and would teach the 3. And the purpose of that is to reflect the new curriculum, the ability to make connections between sciences. It also enables there to be, there's a range of new GCSEs on the horizon, which are applied sciences, so whether it's around engineering or manufacturing. So there's an opportunity to look at other areas which are kind of, touch on the STEM subjects there. So that's the kind of broad context of it. Already more entries are made for double science than all the single applications combined. So that's just the context for where we are today. If you talk to the Institute of Physics, Institute of Chemistry, for example, they support these changes because they recognise the value that comes from making those connections. And I know that Qualifications Wales spoke a lot with higher education institutions about the plans and didn't pick up any concerns from them. So, I think what this will mean is more people will come to subjects at GCSE, and that will embolden them to take these subjects at A-level. And I think that's good for STEM. It makes it more accessible to people. So I myself think this can be a positive thing, and it also enables students to choose to do other subjects related to them, like the engineering and the manufacturing GCSE. So I think that provides a good platform.
Thank you. I think that's probably another continuing conversation that we'll have over the coming months. There is here a question specifically for Owen. And it's an intriguing one, is there an argument for whole clusters to be inspected by Estyn?
It's a good question. Things are getting more complex. I think the way that schools have been working together on developing the curriculum, actually, through the pioneer schools, has led to an increased engagement across both secondaries into primaries, into more clusters, but also schools working together. Now, we're at the point where we've got a couple of years left in the current cycle. One of the conversations I'll be having with schools and policymakers over the next couple of years is how we can redesign what we do to make greater impact from then. So I haven't closed my mind to the idea that we might inspect more on a cluster basis. There's also, for example, there will be college principals here. I can see Mark. There are questions to be asked about how we inspect FE colleges as well. These are big, complex organisations now that perhaps the current framework doesn't suit anymore. So there are fairly fundamental questions about how Estyn actually inspects. And I think, this 8-year cycle we're currently seeing will maybe the last we'll see in the current guise. But that's a big conversations to be had. And we certainly wouldn't replace it with anything that wasn't better.
Thank you. Another intriguing trail to follow, I think. We've started quite a few today. Minister, I wanted to ask you a question about a sentence in your speech that I wrote down, I was intrigued by. You said that if schools, secondary schools, this was in the context of secondary schools particularly, if schools are preparing for Curriculum for Wales, they are preparing for new qualifications. And in the context, because obviously these conversations, we're having the conversation today with school leaders, but obviously education is of critical importance and interest to the wider community as well. And there is a question, we've discussed it often around public confidence, and I just wondered how you'd frame that. If you were talking to a parent, for example, who hasn't quite perhaps grasped the whole curriculum reform agenda yet, is just concerned about their learner, their son, their daughter. Their learner sounds strangely impersonal. But how would you frame that assurance in the context of a parent's question?
Well, this is not, there's no suggestion at all here that qualifications aren't absolutely central to the function of education, just to be clear about it. But the curriculum is about more than that, is the point. So the point in my speech was to say this, really. There is some anxiety among some teachers that because the qualifications reforms haven't reached their conclusion, because we don't yet know today what the qualifications will look like in 2025-27, which is the first period in which they'll be taught, that it's not, that's more challenging for implementing the curriculum. But that's why I was taking us back to what the curriculum is about. It's about ambition and aspiration, it's about support for learners, challenge for learners, the skills for life, the tailored approach, all those things which are absolutely fundamental in the modern world, and we want our learners to have all those benefits and to have all those characteristics when they leave their school. But the other point to make is the process for qualification reform is happening now, and it is absolutely clear that the qualifications will reflect the curriculum. I mean, that is the point of them. So they will reflect those values, which are values that all parents, all learners will want to see their learners leave school with. And I think that's the exciting opportunity. And by the way, there's a practical opportunity as well, which is that Qualifications Wales will later this year be consulting widely on the exact design of some of those qualifications and the content. So there's an absolute opportunity. I made a call to action, if you like, in my speech for teachers to become involved in that, but there'll be a wider, there'll be lots more interest beyond the teaching profession, and there's a real opportunity to try and shape some of those with Qualifications Wales, which I hope people will take.
Lovely, thank you very much. I think Owen, I thought we had an online question for Owen. It's disappeared. Do you want to answer that one?
If I could, this goes back to what's education for. And I think the 4 principles underpinning the curriculums set it out. Now, if the curriculum and the quals don't coalesce, you really have got problems. And, Scotland, to a degree, had issues with that. But I think, I go back to the time when Graham was actually designing the methodology and the principles of the curriculum. He spent a lot of time talking to the higher education sector, the further education sector, because if we weren't teaching the skills and competencies for young people that wouldn't be recognised by these institutions, then, you would have a problem that parents quite rightly would have an issue with. But in those conversations, it was a very positive experience, I seem to remember, that people are actually looking for the types of skills that, the back and things like this have actually brought into what we do. So I think that the qualifications have to now adapt to the principles of the new curriculum, but based on the fact that these are the types of skills that people want, that will be the passport for people to progress into work, into further education, and I think parents could be assured, really, that if we get this right, it can only improve the situation.
Lovely, diolch yn fawr. Our questions have reappeared. This one's for the Minister, however, and welcoming the announcement of national entitlement to professional learning for teachers, and wanting to know what your opinion is on looking into protected professional learning time, and that's associated with another question that's come in from DISC as well around time and securing that for teachers. This question suggests the recent recommendation of the OECD review of the Curriculum for Excellence in Scotland. So how do we get the time?
Well, there's two parts to that question, I think. Obviously, we're looking at what the OECD's report said for Scotland, because we're at the point in time where we can respond to that in real time and learn from some of the challenges which Scotland experienced. I think we're moving into a new kind of curriculum which in a sense, is more creative, isn't it? It requires much more creative engagement. And that's exciting, but it's also possibly more challenging or perhaps more time-consuming. That's why it's been really important from my point of view to make sure that all those professional learning resources that we've commissioned, which is a very large amount indeed, and which we'll carry on commissioning, is as easily accessible in a navigable way so that practitioners know what the kind of core is that they need to try and identify and engage with, and then there'll be a wide range beyond that. The key thing is to make it easily accessible and also for all practitioners in Wales to have access to the same body of professional learning. It's really important. It's a curriculum for Wales after all. How that plays out in terms of the timing, allocation of time in school, I think we need to see how that plays out in the context of the implementation of the curriculum itself. What we've certainly done is include funding into the school system so that provides some extra capacity for the implementation of the curriculum itself. I think the question, to be fair, is asking a slightly different thing. It's a sort of longer-term question about, the new way of working, isn't it, rather than the implementation phase itself. But just to give the reassurance that the funding we've put into the system is designed to create that extra capacity, at least for the implementation phase.
Yes, thank you. And Owen, I think part of the question is about realising as well that co-construction takes time.
It does, yeah.
Owen?
I was just going to add, one of the things I'm really keen for Estyn to do is to support, where you have challenges, let's support. And perhaps I would refer that we did a review which we published back in November, and there's a YouTube video on it as well, that actually looked at how teachers and schools are coping with, this does take time. You have to set time to do these sort of big changes. And inset days are not going to be enough, however many inset days we put in. And so the best examples we saw were schools that actually have redefined their school's curriculum and their timetables for the year and have actually created time for teachers to come together collaboratively or to work actually with other schools as well, which I think is an important facet of what we're trying to achieve. So I think there are ways of doing it, but it's not to lose sight of that it is important to set that time aside to do it properly.
Can I just come in on one further point? I spoke about the national network and I was encouraging people to become engaged in that. I think it is really, really important for practitioners to try and engage with that if they possibly can. And just to say there is funding available to support schools to release that time, because as you say, it does take time if you're going to be doing a co-construction of these things. So.
Thank you. This is an online question for both of you, but mainly for the Minister, we're told. So we'll start, if you're willing, with the Minister. What lessons have been learned from countries such as Scotland, and we've touched on that already. It has given us a fruitful place to go for lessons, I think, hasn't it? And New Zealand, where competency-based curricula have encountered problems. Minister?
Well, I think, as I was saying a little bit earlier, in a sense, it's quite timely for us that the OECD has done this review of Scotland in particular, because we're at an earlier stage of our journey. So we've been in very constant dialogue with the OECD for some time, as you know. So we've been able to benefit from these reflections and insights on a kind of ongoing basis. But I suppose the two takeouts for me, at least from the most recent OECD report on the Curriculum for Excellence. One is around the qualifications and making sure, as Owen was saying, that they need to reflect the curriculum. And obviously we're in that stage now of being able to reflect that in our design work. So I think that's in a positive place. And the second is understanding what progression across the system looks like. Not on an individual learner basis, but what does it look like for the system to be progressing? I think what the OECD was saying in Scotland is that perhaps that needed further work. So, we're at the point now where we can build that into our planning and thinking as well. So I think those are the two big takeouts for me. And the good news is there's time for us to be able to respond to those in Wales.
And I think as well there are places other than New Zealand and Scotland where one might go and look for examples and useful discussion points around this. Owen?
Yeah, no, I'd echo what the Minister said. And funny enough, I'm talking to my opposite number in Scotland tomorrow, and I'll be meeting senior educationalists in Scotland next week. There's a lot we can learn. I mean, there's a massive review going on of Education Scotland at the moment. It'll be really interesting to see what that delivers. The OECD report I thought was illuminating. There are issues, yes, we know that. I suspect they'll get on top of them. But it is this point that if you are channeling the education in a new direction, then all the ships have to sail in the same direction. And in Scotland, I don't think they got that quite right. This is the thing that in Wales we have to learn, and Estyn, same as anyone, has got to play a role in that.
I think that sort of way of engaging with the problems is very important, though. We're all kind of co-constructing a new way of doing this together, aren't we? And no one has the final answer today because there are challenges that will emerge along the way. So I think it's really constructive to approach these challenges in that kind of open, discursive way, really. I think that's part of the way of thinking for the new curriculum generally.
Yes, that's interesting because I was trying to encapsulate what both your speeches essentially were saying, and learning together was what I wrote down as really distilling the message from each of you. I have got a question about something else entirely now, and it is about the pilot, about extending the school day. And the questioner is asking really what the point and purpose of it is and what the implications might be for what they know to be hard-pressed staff and school leaders already, and what their responsibilities might be around this and how they might engage with external providers. What's going to happen with the pilot is basically what it boils down to, I think.
Well, look, I think this is very exciting. I do understand, obviously, that there's a range of opinions and some concerns. I absolutely understand that. That's why we're doing what we are doing, which is running a series of 10-week trials in 13 schools and a college, and all the participants have voluntarily agreed to participate. So that's obviously very important. And they've been given a lot of flexibility about how to design the use of those extra 5 hours for the week, and some flexibility about when to run the period as well, because of other challenges in the system. And I think what we're already seeing is that there are quite a number of, anecdotally really, I suppose at this point, parents and learners who haven't been part of it saying, how come we aren't included in this? So I think there is real interest in it. So at the moment, obviously, the provision has been arranged with a range of external providers, some teaching staff, teaching assistants. So it's a mix in different schools. And I think that's what the benefit is of this, really, is to see at the end of the 10 weeks what has worked well, what has worked less well. And obviously, not everything will have worked well. That's kind of the point of this, is to see that. I don't think, by the way, that what we're going to get to is the end of the 10 weeks and then we'll have a neat report that says, bingo, this is what you need to do. That's not the space we're in. There'll need to be more testing, probably piloting of other approaches alongside that. But the core point about this, it's not about terms and conditions and extending the day. It's about what can we learn from providing, in particular, some of our most disadvantaged learners, but learners more generally with those enrichment activities. And if you talk to the EPI, if you talk to the EF, there are good ways of doing this and bad ways of doing it, by the way, which is why we're trialling it. But it's pretty clear that when done well, it has beneficial outcomes. I think that's what we should all be focusing on at this point. But there are definitely practical questions which will obviously cause concerns, which we will need to work through. But I suppose my message is let's wait until the end of the 10-week period, then we'll all have a set of results we can discuss together.
Yeah, and it is interesting, isn't it, that some schools have innovated around the length of the school day, even in the absence of a pilot, and some of those findings would perhaps be helpful in this regard as well.
Yes.
Owen, you look ready to say something.
No, I've been reading the question that was over.
Okay, this is definitely Owen's question. What training have inspectors had or are going to have on developing curricula and teaching and learning approaches that are likely to support pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds the most?
Yeah, I mean, the training obviously has been going on for a couple of years with inspectors. And some of those approaches actually we'll be trialling with schools over the next few weeks, starting on the 28th. So there's been quite a lot of work about, getting up to speed on what the curriculum and how we can play our role in supporting its rollout. I think on the aspect of the most disadvantaged, yes, there has been a lot of discussions. I've been here for 48 days, as I mentioned. I've had several conversations already about how our support to schools reflects the fact that some schools have more challenges than others and some pupils have more challenges than others. But I'm not sure we've gone far enough, if I was to be honest. And some of the conversations that we've been having behind the scenes with government is about how the new frameworks actually reflect to what extent schools are succeeding in ensuring that those children with the more challenges are supported properly. I mean, while I was chairing the Cardiff Education Development Board, that was probably one of the biggest areas we looked at. And one of the areas that, you know, with the consortia, with the local authority, but also with schools, was a major focus for us. And it's one of the things that I've brought into Estyn. It's one of the things we've been discussing already. So I'm hoping over the coming months we'll probably reinforce that. Now, we're having all HMIs together at the start of April. This is the first time we'll be back together, seeing people, which would be great. And one of the topics for conversation there is this exact issue.
Thank you. Minister, this next question is for you, I think. And thank you for the head teacher who has submitted this one. This one is in Welsh.
Recruiting quality practitioners is a challenge at the moment, especially in Welsh medium schools. Do you have any plans to improve this? Yes, it's challenging, and we do have plans. In the Welsh medium sector specifically, you know, it has been challenging for quite some time. We have a plan of ambitious change in Welsh medium generally that extends beyond the curriculum. But at the end of the day, it is dependent on having practitioners, teachers, teaching assistants who can work through the medium of Welsh. So we're working on a draft plan, and I was working on this before coming here this afternoon, about what we can do to encourage people to come into the profession and to keep them in the profession, specifically in Welsh medium. I want to be as creative and ambitious as we can be. At the moment, I'm looking at all options, to be honest, because it's such a challenge. So a part of that is motivating people to want to teach and to teach through the medium of Welsh, and to do that to target young people, pupils, while they're still in the system. But there's also about encouraging people to do initial teacher education through motivators, incentives, how people can move from teaching in primary to teaching in secondary. All of these things need to be looked at. We're working with stakeholders. There are some really interesting ideas coming in, and hopefully after Easter we'll have something to publish so that we can have a wider conversation about that. But every time I go to a school, especially Welsh medium school, I encourage young people to consider teaching as a career. All of us remember the teachers who inspired us when we were young, and having that impact in someone's life, I think, is one of the most important things anyone can do, I would say. Well, we have the same conversations when we go to schools, I have to say. So, the person who asked that question maybe could take part in that conversation. Owen, is that something you at Estyn see as well, that challenge to recruit inspectors who can inspect through the medium of Welsh? Yes, it is. It's been difficult as we plan inspections even for next term and the term after. It can be difficult, yes. What the Minister has announced, I think, is to be welcomed, but it is a challenge. It's a challenge for us to recruit. Fortunately, we've just been through a recruiting round, and some very good people have applied, which is great for us with Welsh language experience. But it's a challenge for schools, yes, and we know that schools are sometimes a little bit behind because they're not able to recruit long-term staff. They're overly reliant on supply teachers, and it is quite difficult for some schools, especially in some areas where we need to grow Welsh medium education. Thank you very much. I've got a question here from Tim Newbold, head of Ysgol Penacau in Wrexham.
Mr. Newbold's question is about grant funding. And this is probably not an unfamiliar question. Certainly, I've come across it before. And it asks you, Minister, specifically about the many initiatives that are being introduced. And the new curriculum, says Mr. Newbold, is the most exciting one he has seen in 30 years of teaching. But the complex system of grant funding presents quite an obstacle to implementation of important reforms, please would the Minister consider reviewing the current grant funding arrangements so that money comes directly to schools for head teachers to prioritise. You can trust us honestly, says Mr Newbold.
Well, I know that. It's a complex picture, isn't it, school funding, obviously. So some of it comes from government direct, but obviously the majority of it comes through the funding which we provide to local authorities. So, you know, it's a kind of reasonably complex landscape in some ways. However, in relation to the areas which I think Mr Newbold was talking about, which is probably the kind of Welsh Government grants, then I have actually asked officials to look at this, because I do think there is a case for saying some of it is perhaps so slightly overly complicated. Could we make it more streamlined? Could we provide the grants in a way which encourage more innovation in deployment, so perhaps make them easier to fit with the broader strategies that we might have? So just to reassure him, we are looking at that. I do recognise the point that he's making. So hopefully we'll have some good news.
Lovely, thank you very much. I'm sure Mr Newbold will be happy to hear that. This is another question that's been submitted via DISC, and it's specifically in relation to pioneer schools. And it is, what lessons have been learned from that pioneer approach, and how might those lessons, or how are those lessons informing the approach now and will inform the approach in the future?
Well, I think in a number of ways, probably. So obviously the experience of the pioneer schools has been critical in designing the curriculum, and so in a sense that's been spread through the system just by virtue of the design process which pioneer schools played a part in. But it's also, provided extra capacity in the system, I think, obviously, and creativity. I suppose the learning point going forward in the future is how do we make sure that the system, that in the implementation phase, that, for example, the national network that we have, which isn't the pioneer schools, because schools can elect to come together and they can choose to participate, but how do we make sure, even if you're not a school which is directly participating in that conversation, as we call it, how do you get access to that learning, and how do you shape what's being discussed, by the way, as well? So, and there is absolutely a way of doing that. You can go on the hub, on the curriculum pages, it'll tell you how to book, very practical, tell you what's coming up. If you want to get onto it, you can book. If you don't want to be part of it, you can share what you'd like to be considered. And the crucial bit, though, I think, is that when that conversation has happened, the outcome of that will be brought together, so it'll be written up, or there'll be videos, or it depends on what's being discussed. There'll be a range of materials that will all then be, available to feed back into the system. So I think we need to get into a kind of pattern, really, when schools are looking to see what the national networks are looking to talk about, how they can shape that, and how they can immediately, draw the benefit of that and spread it through the system. So the mechanism is there to do it. Hub is there. It's very, very, it's a real asset for our system in Wales. I think it's a question of learning. The national network is a new thing, isn't it? But when that is embedded in the longer term, just getting the pattern of making sure you're accessing what's there and having it spread through the system.
And that accessibility then applying to all schools.
Exactly.
Yes. Owen, did you want to add something?
No, I just reinforce what the Minister says. The work we've been doing, and actually the papers we published back in November, it highlighted the fact that the school-to-school networking, which has been a perennial problem, is still patchy. And we did find some schools working wonderfully together and really, really close links to the pioneer schools, but others where the information was being filtered up through the consortia and then back down to schools. It needs to be a direct link, and they need to be working closely with each other. I think the Pioneer Schools project has released so much innovation. It's been fantastic, but it's making sure that everyone can benefit from that. That's been the key. And also that just because you're not a pioneer school doesn't mean you innovate yourself. Yeah. That you can actually create, you can actually do things yourself. Don't just rely on the work of others, but take what's been created and tailor it to your specific needs.
Lovely, thank you very much. I've got one final question here that has again come in through DISC, but it is the perfect, I think, closing question. And it is, what is the core message that schools should take away from today, from this event?
Well, I suppose for me it's two or three things really. As I said at the start, wherever you feel you are on the journey, it is absolutely not too late. You are definitely not alone, and there's a lot of support out there for you to be able to tap into. Practical thing, after the end of this conference, everyone who's attended, it'll go obviously to every school, will have a very straightforward package of resources with links to all things that you need. It'll tell you what you should be thinking about, where you can find the information, where the case studies are. Really practical. So if you're looking for immediate guidance, the message is look at those, but there's support and you're not on your own.
Lovely. Diolch yn fawr. Owen?
I think the first one is inspections are back. They will be kicking off, but I think what to expect is some sympathy, but also the fact that we as Estyn need to add value to their journey towards delivering the curriculum, and that will be one of our main focuses for years to come.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you very much, and there we are. Friends, I'm afraid our time has run out. Thank you very much for your contributions, and especially, of course, to the Minister and Owen Evans for being with us this afternoon and for being so willing to answer your questions. Remember, there will be a recording of this session online, and as the Minister said, better than I could say, remember to look at the pack of resources that will be shared at the end of this session. But for now, thank you very much. Please keep dry and safe from Storm Eunice. And this obviously is a conversation we'll continue.
That will continue with you over the coming months and years. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi am fod yma prynhawn.
Thank you for being here this afternoon.